Allison, the show is yours. You've given us the summary of who's on your committee. Professor Matt Bell is the thesis chair, and Professor Boliek is a committee member.
So I just want to start today by thanking all of you for being here. I really appreciate your time and coming out in this busy time of year. And I want to thank my committee, as Garth said, Professor Bell, Professor Gornary, and Professor Rockcastle. I would also like to thank all of my classmates. Throughout the past 3.5 years, we've all learned a lot from each other, and I'm going to really miss you guys. It's been a great experience. And thank you to Karai Eisen and Matt Miller for your help in some of the rendering of these drawings. So I first want to start by explaining why this thesis is relevant. And I found a quote that really kind of embodies the issue that I'm responding to. And it reads, according to Harvard sociologist William Julius Wilson, rising inequality is beginning to produce a two-tiered society in America in which the more affluent citizens live lives fundamentally different from the middle and lower income groups. This divide decreases the sense of community. So really what's happening is the middle class is shrinking, the upper class and the lower class are growing. And I was saying, I wonder how architecture can play a role in sort of mitigating this trend. And I actually attended a Wilmington, Delaware City Council meeting last January. Wilmington is my hometown, so I have a vested interest in the area. And this was an issue that really resonated on the local level, big time. It's a real serious problem in Wilmington. And I can see it just from living there and experiencing it myself firsthand. So my passion for housing, coupled with this concern, is really what this thesis stems from. I believe that design has the power to improve lives. And so the real goal for this project is to help empower the residents of the housing as well as the greater community. So really kind of tying in communities' assets that may be currently untapped. And so in May, this past May, so just a little bit less than halfway through this thesis process, I knew that empowerment was kind of the theme of the thesis. And I did an internship at the Wilmington Housing Partnership, which is a non-for-profit in Wilmington, and they do limited new construction, mostly revitalization of existing housing there. And this was really a great opportunity for me because it allowed me to experience the site firsthand, a little bit more, the areas that I would be working in. And it also made me realize what form this empowerment should take. And one of the concerns and the main problems with the city is that so many of these urban areas in the heart of the city are considered food deserts. Delaware is home to 11 food deserts in total, and over half of them are in Wilmington. And that essentially means that you cannot access a grocery store within a mile, which in a city, a large grocery store that is, which in a city, you know, is it's a bad situation. Many of the people are getting their food from little corner stores, convenience stores, so the quality is more junk food, not fresh produce, not healthier foods. And so a food desert, according to the United States Department of Agriculture, is a low-income census tract where either a substantial number or share of residents has low access to a supermarket or grocery store. And this is just so ironic because Delaware is a heavily, it has a great agriculture industry. It's very profitable for the state. And according to the United States Department of Agriculture, Delaware ranks #1 in the country in agricultural production value per farm per acre. And according to the Delaware Food Bank, 42% of Delaware's land is being used for farming purposes. So this diagram, although it's very simple, I think kind of sums up the existing situation and what I would hope to achieve, or at least start to achieve with a project proposal such as this. So on the left, you have, Wilmington in this bubble, and all of these potential links that could be made, but there's this kind of barrier keeping them out. I would hope to join these links with this project through the mixed-use project incorporating a farmer's market with affordable housing. So I want to tell you a little bit about my site selection. I examined 3 sites, but the site that I chose was really based initially on a study of median income levels, because I knew that since it's affordable housing, it's not going to be, it's going to have the best chance at success if it's on the cusp of an area that is more stable, rather than planting it in the middle of a more impoverished area. And so this is the site located right here. It's right along the Brandywine River that you can see there, and in this image here. And it seemed appropriate because it was close to this area, and this area is sort of coming up. And so the median income level here is $42,000 a year for a family of 3. And some of the other sites that I looked at that you can see down here were, in my opinion, a little too far gone for this project, a project like this to succeed. They were more like $15,000 for a family of 3. And so this is the site here, just a massing view of it. It's roughly 2.7 acres, and it is runs along a main corridor here that is the Market Street corridor. Of course, accessibility is important for this site. People, this demographic, which is predominantly African American, 66% African American, and 33% Caucasian, is these are the 3 elements that are very important for this demographic to have access to public schools. There are many single women with children. Churches, the demographic is generally religious, and of course bus stops for public transportation. This site was really set apart from all of the others because of its historic value and architectural character as well. And that was really what got me really excited about the project. There was a lot of inspiration to draw from and a lot of history, rich history. So this map that you see here actually dates to 1884, and it kind of shows that this Market Street corridor was very built up and vibrant even then. It was a center of commerce, and it was sort of the main city center for the milling industry that had developed in Wilmington all along the Brandywine River. So you had, the butcher, the baker, shops like that along there. So seeing this project as a way of revitalizing and rebuilding this area in a similar way that it once was, but in the modern day version, is a goal of this thesis. And so just to allow you to kind of understand the patchwork sort of surroundings of the site and the variety of different building types that were developed throughout different time periods, because it does have a lot of history. It was originally developed in the 1600s, believe it or not. You see the general row home typology, some stone historic buildings. There's actually a job training center immediately adjacent to the site, which could have a very strong relationship with this type of project. You have a park at the end, and this building, which you're seeing here as well, these are condominiums that are actually built on top of the original foundations of the old mills that lined the river. And then over here, this is my personal favorite architecture, is the old mill owners' homes. Many of them were constructed in the late 1600s, and they're still standing there. This particular one has been renovated into a senior center. And so another reason why this site was important to select was because it fit within existing initiatives already in place in the city. There is the Greater Brandywine Village revitalization effort, which has very similar goals to this site, bringing commercial activity back to the center, recreating it as a place of exchange, as a place of social and economic, forming relationships socially and economically. And in order to accomplish the goals of this thesis, I've I've established 5 key design objectives that would achieve these goals. First, to enliven and strengthen the Market Street edge and site centrality. Second, develop a porous space that knits together various programmatic aspects and encourages user engagement. Third, create meaningful relationships between public, semi-private, and private spaces, because we are having a variety of users on this site since it is a market, very public place and housing. Fourth, establish and activate outdoor public communal spaces. And fifth, create flexibility, which is probably the single most important element for this project in site design, market design, and housing design. And so just to familiarize yourself with the plan, we have the main housing over on this side. Well, first of all, I've continued this street, turned it, and bisected the block to allow it to be a little bit more manageable and encourage the user to move through the space. Over here, we have housing of 2 types, which I'll explain the individual unit design in a minute, and amenity space here. The amenity space includes a communal kitchen area that could have a relationship with the market where residents could cook for one another, share meals, learn about different recipes, that type of element. And then this courtyard also serves the demographic, being many single women with children, a safe place for the kids to go out and play, because otherwise the area to this side is not really a place where you would just let your kid go out the door. And so over here is the market space, this main corridor here with a multi-purpose room here. And that would be used for cooking classes, or maybe students would come on field trips and learn about nutrition, elements like that. And then because there is residential above the market, seen here, we have a separate entryway here for those residences. So strengthening the Market Street edge and the centrality through firming up this edge, I've also included in the site plan live works that you can see denoted in the red. And that really was sort of an attempt to strengthen these corners that I'm creating. Porosity is also a very important element in creating this design effectively. And the design essentially has 3 main corridors. One is through the market itself, one is behind the market, which leads you through the park on the raceway. If you notice this pattern here, this actually is on top of one of the old raceways, so reflecting the history that was once there. You can see it here in this map. So that raceway path moves you in through the multi-purpose room, through this plaza space, and all the way up to the amenities. And then the other corridor would be a sort of impromptu corridor right here. When the market is in flux, this paving pattern denotes an area where trucks could pull up, and it could be more of sort of a transient corridor created there. Also, the facade of the market has been treated with large garage door-like operable walls, essentially, so it creates an indoor-outdoor space. And then layers of privacy are very important for this project. As I said, there are a variety of users interacting here. And so, of course, you have the most private spaces are the residences themselves, but then to have a buffer around them is critical so that this is a really livable space, so that you can have that sort of zone where you can interact with your neighbors, but it's not fully public. And then ultimately you have the entire public zone. So there really is a variety of different privacy levels. Also, creating really great outdoor spaces for this type of engagement to occur was important. So we have the main park here, the main plaza that comes through here, which would be used for active market time, and then the more protected courtyard. So I mentioned that flexibility was perhaps the most important of these 5 principles, and the flexibility really happens in terms of the market the arrangement of units on the site and the unit design individually within the unit itself. So because Delaware's season is not always fruitful, no pun intended, it has, at a minimum, the market would be functioning in this blue space. So you just would have the market and the cafe space in action here. But as product comes in and farmers are able to come in and deliver product to the site, you might engage that outdoor plaza space as weather improves too and people want to use it. And then really you could come out and use the road, and market trucks could come up and park along there as you see in the site plan and as you see in the renders. And then at its fullest, the market could use the entire road because there are alternate routes around that just one block over. And so the flexibility occurs not only with the market, but with the unit design. And so you see you have a variety of conditions in which you can live. So maybe if you were, that young single mother with children, you would want to live in one of these units with the courtyard, a more protected environment. But say you're a 20-year-old guy living by yourself and you want sort of the more urban street front view. You would live in one of these units where it doesn't matter if you have a safe place for your kids to go. You don't have kids, so it doesn't matter. But over here, when we talk about flexibility within the individual unit design, you have two unit types that I've developed. The first one, the standard, is 800 square feet, 2 bedrooms, so relatively small 2-bedroom unit. And this is able to expand and contract to as much as really you want, as large as the building is, in theory. But this is how I see it actually happening. So the pink lines denote what would have to be firewalls, 2-hour rated, in order to allow this type of expansion and contraction to really occur. And the lines, the green lines, if you can see here, would indicate where the walls should be pre-established to punch doors through for the ease of construction. So the idea is that the walls can be constructed in such a way to ease this process so that this flexibility could occur, to facilitate that flexibility to occur. And so these are some sort of characters that I've created of how this would work and how these relationships would be formed. So for instance, if Anna is living in this unit with her young daughter and her mother decides that she's going to move in with them and they need another bedroom, you're able to put a door in here into this wall and use this room because maybe this elderly woman here only needs her 1 bedroom and this space. So that's the general principle of how that works. And then this is roughly 90% of the units. There are 130 units in this project total, and this is roughly 90% of them. So I can't really break it down into square footages, but just say that the options can vacillate depending on the needs of the user. And then unit type number 2, that you see here, there are only 12 of these because they're a little different, but they incorporate a shared kitchen space and eating area. So if 2 mothers become friends living in this community and say would like to share, sort of parent their children together, for instance, if one mother has something to do and the other can stay home with the children that day or care for them, it becomes possible. However, you can still lock off this section and have your own family's private zone above and below. And so one last thing I would like to touch on before I open up to questions is the aesthetic of the design. So I really tried to respond to the existing architecture around the site, and I was most inspired by the mill sort of design. And so that means having a stone base and sort of more like wood above, because that's typically how they were designed back then. So if you look at this, for instance, you see the stone base and wood up towards the top, sometimes brick as well. And so at this point, I would like to open up to any comments or questions.
For commenting, I have a couple of other questions just to make sure that I understand. There is one thing that I think you said, but I'm not sure. that struck me in a way. Did you say that since they don't have a big market, they cannot afford to have better produce or better products, meaning small markets, the small units, like traditional units, for some reason don't allow for better quality products to be sold? Second question has to do again with quantity. I see that the residential unit that you selected, right, is considerably bigger than any other building type around. I'm curious to know how, what determines this choice, an economic choice, or the need to make a statement, or the need to have a denser area, and how does relate to the experience of public space. And more in general, I've always been puzzled by this thing. It's no doubt that good form makes life of people better, right? But is it possible for architectural form to contribute to reduce gaps?
Yes, I absolutely believe that to be true. And the reason why these buildings are so much larger than many of the surrounding ones, although they are not much larger than these, is to increase densification. The goal of this project was to achieve sort of a critical mass of units to allow this market to succeed as well, kind of a symbiotic relationship happening there. And then in this I've indicated potential densification. So these are all sites that could potentially be built up around it to kind of reestablish that hub as a commercial center. And your first question was about why there couldn't be produce or is not.
Don't take it as a rhetorical question, it's serious. I mean, are you saying that to make sure or to facilitate the possibility to sell better level, better quality of produce, you have to sort of put the facility all together, meaning have one management instead of many different shops?
Yeah, I see it as a need to establish a larger market in order to have those relationships with sources of agriculture outside the city. Just having more pass through. Because in order to have relationships like this, where, you have your site right here and you have your receivers and your providers, in order to have a relationship like this, I don't see it possible to be, one of those small corner grocery stores. There wouldn't be enough turnover. There wouldn't be enough product intake and output, in my opinion.
I think your site selection is excellent. I know a little bit about Wilmington, and that particular spot that you decided to put your building on is a really interesting dynamic. You have sort of the natural imagery of the Brandy River Valley, which we all know, as you go west past the city, East Delaware, absolutely gorgeous. It comes deep into the city right at this point. It literally stops at that bridge, and then it becomes this kind of industrial, unfortunate side of the road. And then you have the north-south axis of both King Street and also everything the adjoining street over here. It sort of comes down and allows you to look around and get across that bridge. But you have things like the Hotel Dupont, which is a very famous building in Wilmington. You've got the Opera House, which is somewhere about that here. This is at Market Street. Is it still closed to pedestrian vehicle use?
No, it's open.
Okay, so at one point it was supposed that they made the mistake of closing Pedestrian Street, but really interesting part of Wilmington, shops down through here. So there's a very interesting dynamic. All this stuff, when the history of Wilmington comes in, this beautiful natural aspect of what brought people to this spot in the first place. All begins to happen. It's very, very interesting. I think it's a terrific site selection for all those reasons. And to put this kind of not quite experimental building, but this this type and collection of things that you're trying to do a common good with, I think is also very important to getting back to them. So I think that's just to start off, like site selection is spot on. That's kind of looking for.
Just to clarify, you said receiver meaning marketplaces around here?
So,
Could you speak up or maybe repeat the question?
I'm just asking about the diagram, a little bit,
Yeah.
to clarify what receiver, provider, like you're talking about. Because I saw provider meaning the agricultural.
yes,
So do you have one dot
I have
site?
I have one dot here and one dot here because this would be the aquaponics center that is being proposed by the initiative I worked on this summer. So that would be a provider that they would maybe give food to the market and the market would distribute it or sell it. They would have that type of relationship. And then the market itself, because there is green roof garden, could perhaps drum up a little bit of income that would help maintain the housing project.
Good, because I didn't think you talked about that.
No, I didn't. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I'm having kind of two thoughts about the project, and one is maybe about the two different reactions. One is about the formal strategy, and I think you have some sophisticated ideas about the organization and planning. I think the way that you're doing the ground floor is quite interesting. I'm trying to look at that. The other one I'm trying to understand is what the nature is of the data or the information that's supporting the narrative behind the project. Are there sort of facts? Is there a controlling project that deals with market rate production in this area needs and if there, there's some. So I imagine you were exposed to a lot of kind of potential
Right.
development. I mean, are these rental, are these bought, so
These
all these
would-
sort of
right.
subtext things are not really brought up. So
Sure.
so those are two different discussions, because I'm just, if you could open that up a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. These would be rental because it is a little bit of a riskier project for the area. Not riskier, but very different from what is existing in Wilmington. And this really is a response to Wilmington's existing affordable housing efforts, which are, in my opinion, a little bit short-sighted. It's more a Band-Aid rather than a solution that really responds to the surrounding community. And so in that regard, I think that this could be, and sort of have a more of a far-reaching effect in terms of whether it's bought or rented. It would have to be rental, I think, until the success of it was seen. And at that point, perhaps it could be like a rent-to-own type deal if it's successful.
And the scale and scope of it is based on known needs, zoning limits, where's that coming from?
The scope of it is really coming from the needs of the users, the access to fresh produce, just the access, because in order to empower yourself and live well, I feel that you have to have healthy foods. So that's really the root of where this is being established.
Well, I guess I'm trying to understand sort of the food that's a real problem, which I understand that, and the housing is a real problem. And both of them have kind of maybe even market-driven or regulatory infrastructure around them that might control what makes sense.
Right.
You're not saying, and you're driving in a particular direction. You're not saying I'm going to accommodate and subsidize a major chain grocery store to go into this neighborhood.
Right.
So you have a kind of very specific narrative
Right.
that I think it feeds into your project, and that would be a little bit. And then the number of units, where they are, and how they're associated with the site, again, has a very particular context. And so more to draw those facts out, not to judge them, but just understand where they're coming from when people.
I think what you didn't mention was that there are also other shops above, there are stores or existing stores which are
Right
preserved
here, this is
here,
preserving.
which have all
Yes.
kinds of services.
They do.
So it's a good
in the
destination. It
elevation,
has
if you
all
point
kinds
to
of,
Right.
it has amenities.
You can see the existing versus the proposed there. So there is kind of a variety of different, there's a daycare, there's two different types of restaurants, different cultures of restaurants. There's a chiropractor in there, and so,
What store?
yes, but, yeah.
There was also another question that actually had to do with this strategy as well, so and it's probably related to that. It's in this kind of development, the densification is not only just for urban, not only an urban issue, but also it probably has to do with the willingness to get the developer of this kind of project, right? So my other question is that the strategy of development in this area would probably be hard to tell, but I think I'd like you to give me a little bit whether you have studied, because a lot of this kind of project that is actually taking place in the West Coast need to have a mixed income. It cannot be done in a kind of only low income housing. So my question is that are these actually have taken into consideration? Because this is a large investment,
Right.
and since your thesis has a lot to do with political issue and social issues, so this would be a question. You know, I would just say that probably less of architectural issues for you, but in this case, have you done some studies and how many of this actually has been existing in the area that is totally low income? This is not mixed income.
Well, I considered it, I hadn't established it as that, no. There are not very many mixed income communities in Wilmington.
Right.
Most of what is there is low income, so perhaps that would have a good place in this project. That's perhaps something that I should have incorporated. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
For me, I think that those actually very interesting. As soon as if you make that a successful one, they're not all low income people that would be living in the building. There are a lot more interaction between middle class, you know, and a lot of some of them actually divided into some of the dormitory that actually good students actually live in.
Right, that's a really good point.
Then the question, sorry, just to wrap it, is do you think it would be desirable for middle income people that building type? Because this is what we face every day.
But that was why I think that then there's a certain different attraction. For example, if is it cool to live in the city? Lots of young people like to have a lit workspace that produce kind of creative work. A lot of creative offices could actually take on. I would say that the one thing that I'm not really totally convinced in this proposal is that what is the diversified income that would come into the development like this, which is large development?
I think what you're talking about also is a catalyst. I think
Yeah.
the catalyst she's using is the market and the food part. I think that, you know, it goes beyond that too. You could allude to the fact that maybe you had the diagram or you have an idea about the job creation and the jobs that are around here. Because economics are tied to this.
Yeah.
And this kind of demographics that would be coming here. If this is an area nobody wants to live because it's left field from where the jobs are.
Right.
Then that's
And I
just,
think
The interesting thing is that even Detroit can make it work in the certain area where they know that young people didn't have a lot of money, but they like it's hip to actually open a creative workspace in there. So if you have a function, you have some kind of mixed use that could generate some kind of livable space. And also I like the idea of a catalyst. And so my point is that when it becomes such a pure form, the only thing that is actually feeding in is the market, which I think I commend you on that. I think it's great. There would be a mixed spectacle, but looking at more of the kind of catalyst of this such large densification of the urban environment like this, and I know less about Delaware than, so I'm not sure what else in catalyst.
You know, the committee did, just to clarify one thing, we did talk a little bit about this notion of mixed income and things, and I just want to underscore one thing that Allison pointed out, which is she also identified sites where other housing could be infilled in this area. And I think part of the question there was, what level of critical mass could be achieved that this project would benefit from. So that it could well be that those projects, although the site she's identified, might have a different profile of resident as well. And so one of the things she also, I think it bears to underscore, is that she's trying to deal with this question of diversity of resident by making the flexible unit type, which I think is a different approach than making something which has, as we see today, 30% affordable in a market rate building and things like that. So I think that clarifies
Actually,
something.
this is a good segue to a few comments I would like to make. When you design residential buildings, my experience is that you actually design from the inside out. Right? You actually have to design the unit, and everything else comes along. And I would think it would have been really interesting, and perhaps you didn't think about this, because economics are very tied to the affordable housing market. Affordable housing, actually, the architecture is so tightly knit to the affordability part of it, where you talked about the stone base and the wood above. Well, guess what? Actually, currently, that's how a lot of these affordable housing buildings are done, where you do actually have a concrete podium where you have mixed retail or something of that sort, and then you have residential units above, which is stick built. And that actually affects how the section of this building becomes. You actually have different thicknesses, different materials, and it would be really interesting how that informs this thesis. Or in the future, it looks like you're passionate about this. When you work in these projects, you will find that as something that's going to drive your design. All this is awesome. All this is great, how it connects to the community, the catalyst, and all that. But the other point also is this micro level of design, where it goes down to the stud. It goes down to the actual, how you put mechanical units, and how that's going to drive your unit design. These being affordable, they're going to have a very particular mechanical system that it's either going to be condensation packs on the roof, or you have these magic packs per unit, which actually will create these bays and actually will inform of the facade design. And your building type, the type of construction will inform the type of balconies you can do. The thickness of these things all make up to your design. Also your units. When you design units, and I understand this, I think this is a very interesting concept. But you also have other concerns. You have privacy concerns, sound. A normal way to do this is actually have bedrooms with bedrooms,
Right.
living rooms with living rooms, and somehow to see if you could achieve this relationship when you actually do a more normative design, because all those things go to a document called pro forma. Did you hear about this when you were researching?
Yeah, a little bit.
A pro forma is essentially an economic study of the viability, the feasibility of a project. And it's paramount in designing affordable housing.
But you think the pro forma, her building as she's described it in terms of the formal language of the city could fit most pro forma, right? She's not
I don't think
proposing
so.
an urban strategy that would not fit in with the kind of dynamic you're talking about.
But one thing, when you do things like this, and you were alluding earlier, and maybe I misunderstood this, that you're designing apartment rental, right? Affordable, and not really market rate, right? All of these were affordable. But did you allude that as things changed, this building could even become private ownership?
Yes.
That you could actually own these units?
Yes.
Okay. Because that also affects the thinking that you as an architect have in the beginning concept of the project. Mundane things like metering, how are you actually going to think about that in the future? How the whole thing is going to work out? How you actually will divide these units based on these future projections of yours? So it sounds very light when you design these things and you connect to the community, but you actually have to go down to the nitty-gritty of how are you going to make this work as an economic success story.
And oftentimes the financial structure of an affordable housing complex prevents the kind of transition
Exactly.
that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is, it might be interesting to begin to just, aside from that, the formal strategy of the project, I think it might be a discussion about how the spaces might, A, be phased in order to slowly begin to build the neighborhood, and one would justify the other. So you might think of how this would happen as a sequence of events rather than as one big event.
Okay.
The other one is the way in which the building, assuming that the financial work, becomes a project that doesn't broadcast so much anxiety about the community. It may be important in 2014 to have a building which is really closed off and has a very tight. If you imagine, maybe optimistically, that that neighborhood would change and that this folds into what would be more of a mixed or more of an upmarket rate opportunity, then you would say, what can I do as a designer to facilitate this project having a more empathetic relationship with the neighborhood? And what that might do might have to do with subtle things about where you open and close views, how you relate this space as a public event. The ground floor here is a public event, so this is a ground floor public event, and that might have to do with a subtle relationship that might happen over time rather than a sort of complete isolation of those two.
Right.
And so those are the sorts of things that I think might be important for you to kind of grab on as your critical understanding for your particular thesis. The other one is this agriculture, this idea about agriculture, all the sort of things that are being done in cities. Philadelphia's a huge experiment there. I know that this is happening right now around the food desert idea, and the types of programs that are coming and going, everything from high-end restaurants to controlled environment agriculture, all those things begin to happen. How those can be seeded, how they're discovered, and really begin to have a formal impact on your building. So your building just doesn't record that they exist; it begins to have architectural effect. The strongest architectural effect in that, I think, is this building here and this space in which you're trying to kind of and it, as an idea, carries a lot of weight. Formally, I don't know if it, and I think you're really trying to grab around that. I'm trying to see how that might affect that space beyond it, and then how might that connect to the plaza next to it, and in the housing building, that kind of block.
Right.
Allison, what do the circles represent on your big plan over there?
Here,
Yeah, is
quarter
that
mile, half a
quarter
mile
mile
radius.
That's
Yeah.
right. I just want to say, I think given your social objective, I think one of the smartest things you've done here is to pick that site. This kind of community is highly dependent upon both walking and public transportation. And from my little knowledge of Wilmington, which is mostly the sort of downtown core, what I know about it is not all that big. It's a very walkable environment, the downtown. You are right across the river from it. There's only a couple of bridges. You've got your market right on this kind of major street that's going, north out of town. So I think, and it's a kind of messy site, which you don't overly resolve. And so the sort of disposition of the buildings, the way they do and don't react to the buildings that are there. So that, my sense is the thing fits in very well in terms of potential use, in terms of potential capturing the market, in terms of the desirability of wanting to live here because I don't have very much money and I need to have all that kind of transportation and walkability I can possibly get. So I think there's a whole bunch of really smart stuff, which I appreciate.
Thank you.
I think for the market strategy to work well, I think you want to and need to rely on pedestrians from the surrounding area coming to use it.
Sure, yeah.
If these are lower income families, but they earn enough to live here, they most likely work during the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of examples of farmers market in the suburbs, in big cities, in small towns. In the suburbs, people drive to the farmers market. It's usually held on weekend in the parking lot. And in small towns, it happens on weekend, maybe one night. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have Union Square in New York, where they can sustain 12 hours, 3 days,
Right.
3 to 4 days a week.
Right.
Because chefs come to shop there in the morning, And during the day, it's such a large transportation hub that you have this, a lot of maximum traffic. So for this, if people are working during the day, the market is probably not sustainable during regular business hours. People shop for their groceries after business hours. So how do you make this work? I think you have to get people walking here because you're not providing enough parking for maximum number of people to come shop during the day.
But
Right,
there are
I think-
markets work like this in Baltimore, across the street market, which is just more or less the same as yours.
Well, and a lot of the area to the northwest is really, the typology is all row homes, and people would walk there to, pick up one ingredient for their dinner that night that they're cooking, potentially. So it would have accessibility to these people. So.
My question about the number of hours that
Yeah.
it should be lighted is actually an important one. I think that would be a catalyst that brings things happening here. I'm wondering, one thing that I would think I would challenge you more is the idea of this as a producer, as a provider, that area, as this local farm. I'm pretty sure that every city now, the food culture is going there, right? So the idea of actually food culture, ethnic food culture, could actually bring a very interesting light and lively atmosphere here. You think about it as more of a kind of bringing all these good chefs, giving us incentive for the good chef to open a restaurant around here.
Right.
And so then it engage both at a kind of level of agriculture,
Yeah.
local produce, but also more of a kind of making this as a major catalyst.
Right.
Food as a catalyst, because food for you, you're starting it. So you're starting it as a food desert.
Yeah.
So can you make it into an extreme as a kind of everything like it's happening here with all these restaurants. and
Right. That's what
that
I'm
would be-
hoping. Many of these that are marked on here are restaurants. I'm hoping that the market could be a sort of a through place for the
But if
product.
you're not home, you use it as a catalyst, that you bring the affordable housing here, right? You bring those kind of commercial places in here also.
Yeah.
There's
That's a good point.
a lot of development now that actually giving incentive for the chef, a good chef, local chef to come and open something. Not even a major restaurant, but it could be just a kind of a lunch place or something
Right.
like that.
Sure.
I
That's
think-
one way that, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the Baltimore markets function as business incubators because they have little stalls for, food businesses, often ethnic food businesses, which can then develop into restaurants. And that this is a kind of model that I think Michael Piatak has used on the West Coast for housing along with a kind of business incubator
Right.
space. So I see him doing that here. And I think this is another reason to think about the income levels to be somewhat mixed because I think it's a sense of the potential for moving up through the market catalyzing opportunities for people in this area. And just one last thought is that when you design for a kind of particular group, sometimes there are great ideas in there that make it great for everyone. So I think that's another kind of, what should I say, reason to think about this not just being a kind of lower income housing idea, but wouldn't it be great for people, at all income levels to live in a place that has such fabulous food culture?
Yeah.
But what she does, which is great, is that she adopts the highest common denominator for housing. So she rises up, she gives people who deserve it the best she can, and other people can do the same. When most of the housing policies now is you adopt the lowest common denominator for this type of thing. So she's on the right track. I mean, people who want to live there will be attracted to this place, no matter what their income is.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because you look at the building, at the facades, they're very attractive. And they're very, I think they do not want to be this super modern building. You want to be a very contextual building that actually matches what's there. And maybe architects would want to make these into, all kinds of fancy buildings, but reality is people love this. And I think this looks like a very fancy apartment building that I want to be in. I think that's successful. I get this.
I do have to steer our comments to the last few closing comments for our two committee members, but if there are last minute, a few inserted.
I do want to jump on one thing. I want to talk about your units a little bit. I think you've got some very interesting ideas about how those units can be combined and manipulated to serve different needs. I'm not sure how successful a common living area kind of unit would be, but maybe there's precedent for that that's being established up there now. The one commonality, though, I see, a common problem I see in your units are the bedrooms right on the public access way.
Yes.
Did you, in researching that, did you find good examples of how that can work? Because that just seems like a bedroom where the lines would be drawn.
That was something that was a concern, and I played around with several different options. At some points I had flower basins that projected 3 feet out just to keep people from coming up to your window. As it is now, these windows are elevated to about 6 feet, so people walking past can't just look right into your unit.
But you
it was a trade-off for. I'm
you
sorry.
have views then if it's elevated to 6 feet?
You wouldn't have views. You would just have natural daylight coming into your space. I saw it as a trade-off for cross ventilation on a single loaded corridor. So.
But you kind of boxed yourself into that problem because of the way you want this common living space to run right through this.
Right.
And you've got your bedroom on the side of it. So maybe, if you continue to manipulate this a little bit, you try to find a way to get those bedrooms on the view side that you can have.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you run into the problem with, I don't know if this is actually sidewalk level, but, there's sort of issues along this street where you're entering your unit, you have bedrooms right on that, right on the street on that first floor. So that's.
Of course, this is also more typology that you could look at, right? You have to look at depth construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are all this section. It's manipulated in section.
Right.
Isabel, if you could bring us toward closure, Matt will.
I think what Allison provided a lot of open spaces to individual units, and I think that's something wonderful. I mean, I always deplore, as a European, the lack of balconies in most places. And had she had a little more time, I think she would have shown how those balconies can produce food themselves and can be used in different ways. The other thing, I think, the notion of mix of ages and generation was very important for Allison, and the notion that I think there will be a lot of elderly people who would like to live in a place like this and who would take great advantage of the market. So I don't see that market not working on a daily basis.
Well said. Well, we oftentimes have this conversation around the school about different kinds of thesis projects. And one of the jokes we make is that one of the thesis topics students gravitate towards is there's something wrong with my hometown. And Allison is from Wilmington, and she did a very thorough job of vetting these different sites, and she took it one step beyond in a nice way, which is not only is there something wrong, and she identified a great site, as Steve pointed out, to investigate that, but she also put her finger on a very pervasive social issue, which Wilmington has in great quantities about some of the neighborhoods close to the downtown. And I think that the choice of site, I think, has been very key for Allison, as well as the experience that she dove into in her internship and going back there and talking to people and trying to learn more about this problem. The market thing is an interesting question that she inserted into this question of food, this question of how you make healthy neighborhoods. And I was saying to Garth, it reminds me of an article that was in the New Yorker not so long ago about the fact that somebody had actually measured the relationship between societal happiness and the size of your refrigerator. And that they found that the smaller the refrigerator, the happier people were. And what they concluded was that people who shopped every day, like Italians, because they go to the market, they go home, grab something, and then they cook it, tended to live healthier lives because they bought fresh food on the way back from work, because there was always a neighborhood market nearby. And I think the insertion of this programmatically, of this market as a kind of key piece of this, is one way one could begin to get their arms around this question, because we know that these income levels of people you're targeting for a project like this tend not to live healthy lives. And so what you would do is not only give them a market, but also give them very small refrigerators, so that they could load them up. My sister has a refrigerator the size of a smart car. It's enormous, you know. The other thing I think is interesting about this is this question of who lives in this complex. And probably, I think the questions that have been raised about making it more of a mixed income is probably what you would probably do these days in these municipalities, because what they would do is say you could up the density if you have 30% affordable at 80% AMI and those sorts of formulas. So they let you build, you know, a little bit more height, a little bit more density, make it market rate, and that tends to support the inclusion of people who need to have subsidized units and things. And from a social point of view, that's thought to be a better way than concentrating one income type in one place. Now, I can tell you that the committee did think about that with Allison because of her identification of these other things. I think what these other sites, what tends to happen, for example, in some places, is that you can have a building that does have this high level of affordability as long as you have a neighborhood that has great quantities of mixed income and market rate things. And I think that's probably been your assumption all along. The final thing I want to say is that I think one of the things that this thesis touches on is this question of making things that relate to where they are. And you know, architects for years particularly in the post-World War II decades, got to experiment with housing for the poor and make things that were highly idealized and things that one could identify and look at and say, well, that's where all the poor people live. And we went through some really great decades of problems, social problems and design problems with how we did things like that. And the extent to which a project like this would succeed would probably depend greatly upon how well people thought it fit in. So they couldn't point to it and say, that's where all the poor people are warehoused, that it looks like something that might have been there all along with these other buildings that inhabited this site historically, or even with some of the market rate things that are nearby. So I think that would be probably a challenge for this as you began to develop it. But thank you so much, Allison, for bringing such a kind of interesting urban design site, a tremendously important and vexing social problem, and synthesizing those two things in a very unique way.